customer abuses, employee with Down syndrome. Unaware, Keanu Reeves is watching. It was supposed to be just another regular day at the cafe, a warm, cozy place where people stopped by for their morning coffee, chatted with friends, or simply enjoyed a quiet moment. The soft hum of conversations filled the air, and the scent of freshly brewed espresso wrapped around the customers like a comforting embrace. Among the employees was James, a kind-hearted young man with Down syndrome who had been working at the cafe for over a year. Everyone who knew him adored him. He had a way of making people smile, whether it was through his infectious enthusiasm or his unwavering dedication to his job. He greeted every customer with the same genuine warmth, always eager to help, always putting in his best effort. To his co-workers, James wasn't just a team member, he was family. But not everyone shared that sentiment. That afternoon, as the lunchtime rush settled and the cafe took on a quieter rhythm, a new customer walked in, a sharply dressed man in his late 40s, with an air of impatience clinging to him like a shadow. He scanned the menu board with a frown, his fingers drumming against the counter as he waited to place his order. The cashier was busy with another customer, so James, as he always did, stepped forward with a smile. "Hello, sir. How can I help you today?" James asked, his voice bright and welcoming. The man barely glanced at him. "I need a large Americano, extra hot, and make it quick," he said, his tone clipped. James nodded enthusiastically. "Coming right up, sir." He moved with care, focusing on getting everything just right. But as he reached for the cup, his hands trembled slightly, causing the lid to slip from his grasp and roll onto the counter. He quickly picked it up, an embarrassed smile flashing across his face. "Oops, sorry about that," he said, as he placed the lid back on the cup securely. But the man's patience had already worn thin. "Are you serious?" he scoffed, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "How hard is it to put a lid on a cup? This is exactly why people like you shouldn't have jobs like this." The cafe fell silent. The few customers who had been enjoying their drinks looked up, eyes darting between James and the man. A couple of James's co-workers shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, ready to step in if needed. But James, ever the optimist, kept his smile, even as hurt flickered behind his eyes. "I'm really sorry, sir. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again," he said, his voice quieter this time. But the man wasn't done. He scoffed, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. This is why customer service is a joke these days. I'm paying good money, and I expect competent service." James's hands fidgeted at his sides, the sting of the words settling in. His manager, a kind woman named Laura, had already started to walk over, but before she could intervene, a deep, steady voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. Sitting in the corner, unnoticed until now, was a man who had been quietly sipping his coffee, watching the entire interaction unfold. He stood up, pushing back his chair, and as he stepped forward into the light, the rude customer's expression shifted, first to confusion, then to shock, because standing before him was none other than Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star known for his kindness and humility. Fixed the man with a calm but firm gaze. The cafe fell even more silent, the moment stretching like a held breath. No one had expected this. No one had realized who had been watching the entire time. The rude customer swallowed, suddenly looking unsure of himself. But Keanu, he wasn't about to let this slide, and in that moment, the entire cafe braced for what was about to happen next. The air inside the cafe grew thick with tension. The once chatty customers now sat frozen, their eyes locked onto the scene unfolding. Before them, The man who had insulted James looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It was clear that he had recognized Keanu Reeves, and the realization left him speechless. James, on the other hand, remained unaware of the growing spectacle. He only knew that a stranger had stood up for him, something that didn't happen often. When he faced moments like this, his usual optimism fought against the sting of humiliation. But even he couldn't ignore the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. Keanu took a step closer, his expression calm but serious. "Everyone deserves respect," he said simply. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make the man flinch. Especially people who are just trying to do their job. The man scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest in an attempt to regain control of the situation. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, though his tone lacked sincerity. "I just don't have time for mistakes." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying the man. "Mistakes?" he echoed. "You mean the kind that everyone makes? The kind that doesn't actually hurt anyone?" The man opened his mouth to argue, but hesitated. Around him, the weight of silent judgment from the other customers pressed down like an invisible force. A few of them exchanged glances, clearly siding with Keanu and James. Even James's co-workers had stepped closer, their expressions a mix of concern and quiet support. Still, the man wasn't ready to back down completely. He let out a short, uncomfortable laugh. "All right, fine. Maybe I overreacted," he said with a forced shrug. "But it's not like I knew I was being watched by a celebrity." Keanu's expression didn't change. "So you'd only treat people with kindness if someone famous is watching?" The question hung in the air, cutting through the man's weak defense like a knife. He had no response. His gaze flickered around the cafe, as if searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to turn. The damage was done. Meanwhile, James stood. Quietly, his usual enthusiasm dimmed, but not completely gone. He wasn't used to people standing up for him like this. Sure, his co-workers always had his back, but it was different when a stranger, let alone someone as famous as Keanu Reeves, spoke up. He looked at Keanu, eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. You didn't have to do that," James said softly. Keanu finally turned his attention to James, and the kindness in his expression returned. "Of course I did," he said. "You deserve respect, just like anyone else." Laura, the cafe manager, finally stepped forward, breaking the moment of silence. "James, why don't you take a short break?" she suggested gently. She could see the way his hands were still slightly unsteady, the way his usual brightness had dulled just a little. James hesitated but nodded. "'Kay," he said quietly, before slipping into the back room. With James gone, Laura turned to the man. She didn't need to raise her voice to make her stance clear. "We treat all our employees with kindness here," she said firmly. "If you can't do the same, you're welcome to take your coffee and leave." The man's face burned red, not with anger, but with shame. For a moment, it seemed like he might lash out again, but the weight of what had just happened finally caught up to him. Without another word, he grabbed his coffee and hurried out of the cafe, his earlier arrogance completely gone. As the door shut behind him, the tension in the cafe seemed to ease. A few customers whispered among themselves. Others gave Keanu a subtle nod of approval, but he wasn't looking for recognition. His eyes were still on the door James had disappeared behind. Laura sighed, running a hand through her hair. "He gets that kind of thing sometimes," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "James tries not to let it bother him, but you saw what happened." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "It's not right," he said. "No one should be treated like that." There was a pause. Then Laura smiled, her expression softening. "Thank you for stepping in. Most people just look away." Keanu offered a small smile in return. "Well," he said, "maybe more people need to start looking in the right direction." At that moment, the door to the back room creaked. "Open!" And James stepped out hesitantly. His usual energy wasn't all the way back, but he seemed steadier now. He looked at Keanu, then at Laura, and finally he smiled. "Do you want a refill on your coffee?" James asked, his voice a little shy but hopeful. Keanu chuckled, holding up his cup. "That would be great." And just like that, the moment passed. The cafe slowly returned to life, the hum of conversation picking up once more. But something had shifted, something small but important. Because today, kindness had spoken louder than cruelty, and James, despite the sting of what had happened, knew that he wasn't alone. What he didn't know was that this moment, this ordinary day in the cafe, was about to turn into a story that would be remembered far beyond the walls of this little coffee shop, because someone had been recording the whole thing. And soon, the world would see what had happened here today. As James carefully refilled Keanu's coffee, the cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by a quiet warmth that spread through the space. People who had witnessed what happened still exchanged looks, murmuring to each other about the unexpected moment they had just experienced. A few even pulled out their phones, checking social media. But James remained blissfully unaware of what was unfolding beyond the walls of the cafe. It didn't take long before the video of the encounter started making its way across the internet. A customer sitting nearby had recorded the entire thing. James's kindness, the rude man's harsh words, and Keanu Reeves stepping in without hesitation. The video was posted with a simple caption: "Keanu Reeves stands up for a hardworking employee. This is what real kindness looks like." Within hours, the clip exploded online. It was shared across social media. News outlets picked it up, and comments flooded in from thousands of people. Some praised Keanu for stepping in, while others expressed their admiration for James's patience and work ethic. Many were outraged by the way James had been treated, and the overwhelming response was clear. People wanted to make sure he knew he was valued. Back at the cafe, James was still going about his work as usual, unaware that his life was about to change. He was wiping down a table when his co-worker, Mia, rushed over, her eyes wide with excitement. "James, you're trending online," she said breathlessly, holding up her phone. James blinked. "Trending? What do?"